A cold CEO and a homeless mother. One rainy night changed both their lives forever. Welcome to True Soul Narratives, where every story carries a heartbeat. Love, betrayal, kindness, and the courage to start again. If this story resonates with you, subscribe and leave a like. Now let's return to the story. The rain hammered against the windows of the black Mercedes like bullets, turning the Chicago streets into rivers of neon and shadow. Julian Hayes sat in the back seat, his expensive suit dry and pressed, his eyes fixed on the glowing tablet in his lap. Numbers, projections, profit margins. The acquisition would close tomorrow. 15 million. Clean, simple. The car stopped at a red light. Julian didn't look up. Then came the tapping, soft at first, then desperate. A woman's voice muffled by rain and glass. "Please, sir. My baby needs medicine, anything you can spare." Julian's jaw tightened. He'd heard this before, seen it 1,000 times. The city was full of people with their hands out, their sob stories, their emergencies that were somehow always his problem to solve. He waved his hand dismissively, still not looking up from his screen. His driver, Thomas, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Sir, should I call security?" "Just drive when the light changes," Julian said flatly. But the tapping continued, more frantic now. The woman's face pressed against the window, tears mixing with rain. "Please, she's sick. Please just look at her." Then the baby's cry changed, from loud and demanding to weak and thin, and then to nothing at all. Julian's head snapped up just as the woman collapsed against his car door, sliding down the rain-slicked metal. Through the window he saw it, the baby in her arms, lips tinged blue, body limp and listless. This wasn't hunger. This was a medical emergency. Recognition crashed over Julian like ice water. Memories he'd spent 5 years burying flooded back. Hospital rooms, machines beeping, a hand going cold in his. His hand hovered over the door lock, trembling. 5 years of shutting people out, of building walls so high nothing could reach him, warred against one moment of terrible clarity. The baby was dying. Thomas was already moving to shoo the woman away. "Ma'am, you need to step back." Julian opened the door and stepped out into the rain. 5 years ago, Julian Hayes was the coldest yo-yo in Chicago, a man who'd built walls so high even compassion couldn't reach him. That night, a homeless mother and her dying baby broke through those walls. And what happened next would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself, about family, and about the cost of success. But to understand how a heartless CEO became a father, you need to know what made him so cold. Julian Hayes was 42 years old and one of the most feared men in Chicago. As CEO of Hayes Financial Group, he'd built a billion-dollar empire from absolutely nothing. He'd grown up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where gunshots were the soundtrack to childhood and opportunity was something you saw on television, not something you lived. But Julian had been brilliant. Scholarship to Northwestern, MBA from Wharton. Started his company in a studio apartment with a laptop and a dream. Within 10 years, he was managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions. Within 15, he was a billionaire. He was ruthless, calculating. The kind of man who saw every interaction as a transaction, every person as either an asset or a liability. His competitors respected him because they feared him. His staff obeyed him because termination was always one mistake away. But it hadn't always been like this. 5 years ago, Julian had been different. He'd had a wife, Simone. Beautiful, brilliant, the only person who could make him laugh, who could soften the edges that business had sharpened. They'd been trying for a baby for 3 years. And finally, they'd succeeded. Simone was 6 months pregnant when she got the diagnosis. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. Fast and brutal and utterly without mercy. The doctors gave her options. Chemotherapy might buy her time, but it would almost certainly kill the baby. Wait until delivery, and the cancer would likely kill her. There was no good choice, only impossible ones. Simone had chosen to wait, to give their son a chance. She'd looked at Julian with eyes full of love and said, We'll both fight, and one of us will win. Neither of them did. She died 3 days after the baby, and the baby, too small, too early, too fragile, followed her within hours. Julian had held his son once, just once, a tiny, perfect thing that never drew breath. After that, something in Julian died too. He'd shut down completely, threw himself into work with a violence that scared even his most dedicated employees. 18-hour days became 20-hour days. He stopped going home, slept in his office, lived on coffee and conquest. Business is numbers, he'd told his shocked board when they had expressed concern. People complicate things. And so Julian Hayes became the cold CEO, the man who never smiled, never showed weakness, never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. His staff feared him. His competitors wanted to be him. And nobody, absolutely nobody, really knew him. That late October night, the rain had started around 7 p.m. and hadn't stopped. By 9:47 p.m., when Thomas pulled up to collect Julian from the office, the streets were flooding. Traffic backed up at every intersection. Julian climbed into the back seat without a word, his tablet already open, reviewing the final details of tomorrow's acquisition. $15 million, 300 jobs. None of it mattered except the numbers. He saw nothing but profit margins and growth projections, the cold mathematics of success. Thomas navigated through the gridlocked streets, windshield wipers working overtime, the radio murmuring low about the storm. Julian didn't hear it, didn't see the people huddled in doorways, the umbrellas turning inside out, the city drowning around him. He saw spreadsheets, balance sheets, the clean, simple world of numbers where nothing hurt because nothing was real. That's when she appeared. Claire, though Julian didn't know her name yet, all he saw was a figure in the rain, tapping on his window, desperate, soaked, holding something wrapped in a threadbare blanket. "Please, sir." Her voice was muffled but clear. "My baby needs medicine. Anything you can spare." Julian didn't even look up. He'd heard it all before. Every story, every angle. People wanted money. They always wanted money. And they always had a reason that was supposed to make you feel guilty enough to hand it over. He waved her away with one hand, eyes still on his tablet. Thomas watched in the mirror, uncomfortable. "Sir, should I call security?" "Just drive when the light changes," Julian said, his voice flat, emotionless. But Claire didn't leave. She pressed her face against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks, mixing with the rain until Julian couldn't tell which was which. "Please, she's sick. Please just look at her." The baby in her arms started crying, a thin, desperate wail that cut through the sound of rain and traffic. And then, as Julian finally glanced up with irritation, the cry changed. It went from loud to weak, from demanding to pleading. And then it stopped altogether. Claire's eyes went wide with terror. She looked down at her baby, at the tiny face going slack, the lips turning blue, and she collapsed. Just slid down the side of Julian's car like her legs had given out, her body crumpling onto the wet pavement. Julian's tablet slipped from his hands. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw it clearly now. The baby wasn't crying from hunger or cold. The listless way the small body lay in Claire's arms. The blue tinge to the lips. The shallow, labored breathing. This wasn't a scam, this was a medical emergency. And in that instant, 5 years of carefully constructed walls cracked. Julian's mind flashed back to another hospital, another desperate moment, machines beeping their monotone symphony of failing hope. Simone's hand going cold in his. His son, too small and too still. He couldn't save them. But maybe he could save this one. His hand moved to the door lock, hovering there. 5 years of shutting people out. 5 years of protecting himself by refusing to care. 5 years of being dead inside so nothing could hurt him again. Thomas was already opening his door, ready to handle the situation. "Ma'am, you need to step back from the vehicle." Julian opened his door and stepped out into the rain. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to True Soul Narratives. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about compassion and second chances. Have you ever helped a stranger in a moment of crisis? Tell us your story in the comments below. The rain soaked through Julian's $1,500 suit in seconds. He didn't care. He knelt beside Claire on the wet pavement, his knees hitting concrete, and his hands reached for the baby with a certainty that surprised him. Thomas stood frozen by the driver's door. "Sir, what are you—" "Call an ambulance," Julian said, his voice cutting through the storm. "Now." He took the baby from Claire's trembling arms. Emma, though he didn't know her name yet, just a tiny thing, maybe 8 months old, her skin too pale, her breathing too shallow. Julian pressed his fingers gently to her neck, feeling for a pulse. There, weak, thready, but there. Claire looked up at him, rain and tears indistinguishable on her face. "Please," she whispered, "please don't let her die." Julian felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd kept frozen for 5 years. "I won't," he heard himself say. "I promise." The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the rain-soaked night. Paramedics swarmed, taking Emma, checking vitals, firing questions Claire could barely answer. Julian climbed into the ambulance without being asked, without thinking, driven by something he didn't understand and couldn't name. Thomas was left standing in the rain, staring after the ambulance as it disappeared into the night, too stunned to even close the car door. The emergency room at Chicago General was bright and sterile, and nothing like the private hospitals Julian was used to. Emma was rushed into a trauma bay, doctors and nurses moving with practiced urgency. Claire stumbled after them, but a nurse caught her gently. "Ma'am, you need to be examined too. Let them work." They took Claire to another bay, and Julian found himself in the waiting room, his soaked suit dripping onto the linoleum floor, surrounded by people who stared at the black man in expensive clothes sitting among them like he'd landed from another planet. He didn't leave. An hour passed, then 2. Julian sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped, his mind replaying the moment he'd seen Emma's blue lips, Claire's desperate eyes. He should leave. He'd done his part, called the ambulance, made sure they got help. His job was finished, but his body wouldn't move. At 12:34 a.m., a doctor emerged, young, tired, but smiling. The baby's stable, severe pneumonia, dehydration, hypothermia. Another hour and we would have lost her. Julian's breath released in a rush he hadn't known he was holding. "And the mother?" he asked. "Malnutrition, exhaustion. She'll recover, but she needs rest and proper nutrition." The doctor paused. "Are you family?" "No," Julian said. Then, surprising himself, "But I'm staying until they're okay." 2 hours later, Claire was moved to a regular room. Julian knocked softly before entering. She was sitting up in bed, her face clean now, the dirt and rain washed away to reveal a woman younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 32. She'd been pretty once. Still was, under the exhaustion and desperation. "Emma?" she asked immediately. "Stable. They're monitoring her closely, but she's going to be okay." Claire's face crumpled, relief and grief and exhaustion all colliding. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." Julian Hayes." If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. She just nodded. "I'm Claire Morrison." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire started talking. Not because Julian asked, but because the words seemed to need out, like a dam breaking after holding too long. She'd been a teacher, 3rd grade, had loved her boss, loved her students. She'd married her college sweetheart, Michael, and they'd been happy. Normal. The kind of boring, beautiful life that people take for granted until it's gone. Michael died 2 years ago. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. "The medical bills came first," Claire said, her voice hollow. "Then the funeral costs, then the mortgage we couldn't pay without his income. I tried to work, but daycare for Emma cost almost as much as I made. I lost the house. Moved in with my sister, but she had her own family, her own problems. After 6 months, I had to leave." She looked down at her hands. "I've been homeless for 6 months, living in shelters when there's room, sleeping in my car when there's not. I applied for assistance, but the waiting lists are months long. Food banks run out. Shelters are full. I tried everything, Mr. Hayes. I'm not lazy. I'm not a drug addict. I'm just broken. and I don't know how to fix it. Julian listened, really listened. For the first time in 5 years, he heard someone else's pain and felt it resonate with his own. He saw himself in her desperation, in the way life had taken everything and left her scrambling in the wreckage. He saw his wife in the fierce maternal love that had kept Claire going when giving up would have been easier. And when he thought of Emma, he saw the son he'd never met, the tiny, perfect thing that had slipped through his fingers. I understand, Julian said quietly, more than you know. The next morning, a different doctor appeared, older, more matter of fact. Emma's doing better, but she needs at least 2 weeks in the hospital. After that, ongoing care. Medication, checkups, physical therapy to regain the strength she's lost. Claire's face went white. I can't afford that. I can barely afford to exist. Julian stood before he'd consciously decided to speak. I'll cover it. All of it. Both Claire and the doctor stared at him. Claire's expression shifted from shock to suspicion. Why, what do you want? Julian met her eyes and felt the truth rise up from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd buried 5 years ago under concrete and steel. Nothing, His voice cracked. I can't watch another mother lose her child. Claire saw it then, the pain he carried, the loss that had carved him hollow. She didn't know the details, but she recognized the shape of grief. It looked like her own. Thank you, she whispered. The words felt inadequate, too small for what he was offering. But they were all she had. Julian visited every day for the next 2 weeks. It went against every instinct, every walls he'd built, every defense mechanism that had kept him functioning. But something pulled him back to that hospital room, to Claire's grateful smile and Emma's tiny hands. He brought Claire clothes from department stores, not asking her size, just guessing. Food that wasn't hospital cafeteria mystery meat, books to read while Emma slept, small things, necessary things, things that said, I see you without making her feel like charity, and he played with Emma. When Claire needed to sleep, to shower, to just breathe without the weight of constant vigilance, Julian sat beside the crib and entertained the baby. Made faces, sang songs he didn't know he remembered. Let her grab his finger with her tiny hand. When she did, when Emma's fingers wrapped around his and held on with surprising strength, something in Julian broke open. Not broke apart, broke open, like a shell cracking to let something grow. The hospital staff noticed. Nurses whispered about the cold CEO who smiled at a baby. Thomas, picking Julian up one evening, saw the change and mentioned it to Patricia, Julian's assistant. Word spread through Hayes' financial group like wildfire. Mr. Hayes is different. Mr. Hayes smiled today. Mr. Hayes left at 6 p.m. During those 2 weeks, Julian and Claire talked, really talked. She told him about Michael, about the life they'd planned, about how grief had a weight she hadn't expected. He told her about Simone, about the baby he'd held once, about the 5 years he'd spent as a ghost, going through motions, pretending to be alive. I shut down after, Julian admitted one evening, his voice raw. Decided loving people was too dangerous. That if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't lose anyone else. Claire looked at him with understanding that came from her own experience. But not loving anyone is just slower death, isn't it? The words hit Julian like a revelation. She was right. He'd been dying for 5 years, just slowly, invisibly, alone. They bonded over shared grief, over understanding what it meant to have everything ripped away. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, two broken people recognizing each other's fractures and not turning away. On day 14, Emma was discharged, healthy, strong, ready to go home. Except Claire didn't have a home. The shelter was still full. Winter was coming, brutal Chicago winter that killed people on the streets every year. Julian knew he should walk away now. He'd done his part, saved Emma's life, paid the bills. Job finished. But he looked at Emma's smile, the way she reached for him now when he entered the room. He looked at Claire's desperate eyes, the fear she was trying to hide, and he thought of his mansion. 40 rooms, empty hallways, no life, no laughter, no purpose. Julian made a decision that would change everything. Come stay at my house, he said. Claire stared at Julian like he'd spoken a foreign language. Come stay at your house? Guest wing, Julian clarified, trying to make it sound reasonable, practical, not like the insane offer it actually was. Until you get back on your feet. I can't, Claire said immediately. That's too much. You've already done so much. I have 40 rooms and no one in them. Julian interrupted. You have a baby and nowhere to go. It's practical. Claire saw through the excuse immediately, saw the compassion he was trying to disguise as logic. Temporary, she insisted, her pride demanding some kind of boundary. Temporary, Julian agreed. Both of them knew it was a lie. 3 days later, Thomas drove them to Julian's mansion in Lincoln Park. Claire held Emma in her arms, staring out the window as the neighborhood transformed from urban density to tree-lined streets, from apartment buildings to estates hidden behind iron gates. When they pulled through Julian's gate, Claire's breath caught. The house was massive, Georgian architecture, perfectly maintained grounds. The kind of place that appeared in magazines about how the other half lived. Inside was worse. The mansion was cold, sterile, beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, designed to be admired but not touched, not lived in. Every surface gleamed. Every piece of furniture looked expensive and untouched. There were no photographs, no personal items, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. It was a mausoleum. The staff assembled in the foyer to meet them, their faces a mixture of shock, judgment, and confusion. Their CEO, the man who barely acknowledged their existence, had brought home a homeless woman and a baby. Julian didn't explain, didn't justify. He simply said, "This is Claire and Emma. They're my guests. Treat them with respect." The message was clear. Question it and lose your job. Claire and Emma were given the entire East Wing. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a sitting room. More space than Claire had lived in even before she lost everything. Emma's room was furnished within a day, crib and toys and everything a baby could need appearing as if by magic. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the mansion began to change. Emma's laughter filled the empty halls. The sound was so foreign, so unexpected, that staff would stop and listen, unsure what to make of it. Julian's home had been silent for 5 years. Now it echoed with giggles and babbling and the sound of tiny feet learning to walk. Claire cooked dinner, not every night, but often enough. Julian would come home to the smell of garlic and herbs, of food made with care instead of ordered from expensive restaurants. He'd forgotten what that felt like. Home. He started coming home earlier, not at midnight, not at 10 p.m., but at 7, then 6:30, then 6. Telling himself it was just to check on them, to make sure they had everything they needed. Knowing it was a lie. He came home because Emma's smile was the best part of his day. He played with her before bedtime, got down on the floor with building blocks and stuffed animals. Let her climb on him, pull his tie, grab his glasses, let himself be human again. The mansion, for the first time in 5 years, felt alive. Patricia, Julian's assistant, noticed first. She'd been with him since the beginning, had watched him transform from a driven entrepreneur to a grief-stricken ghost. One afternoon, delivering papers for his signature, she paused. "Sir, if I may say, you seem happy." Julian looked up from the contract he was reviewing, surprised. Then he realized she was right. He was happy. When had that happened? Claire, for her part, refused to be a charity case. Within 2 weeks, she'd applied for teaching positions at every school in the area. Within a month, she had a job at a local elementary school. 3rd grade, just like before. Julian didn't pull strings, didn't make calls. She earned it on her own merit. She insisted on paying rent. Julian refused. They compromised on Claire helping with Emma, though both knew Julian would have done it anyway. This wasn't about money. It was about Claire's pride, her need to rebuild herself on her own terms. Julian respected that, admired it even. They became a family without trying, without planning it or discussing it or making it official. It just happened. Dinners together at the long dining table that had sat empty for years. Emma in a high chair between them, throwing food and laughing. Claire telling stories about her students. Julian talking about deals, but differently now, about the people affected, not just the numbers. Emma started calling him Juju. Couldn't quite manage Julian, so it came out as two syllables of pure affection. The first time she said it, reaching for him from her crib, Julian felt something in his chest that he thought was dead forever. He read her bedtime stories. Good Night Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Books he'd bought for his son and never gotten to read. Now he read them in a soft voice, Emma's head on his chest, her breathing slowing as sleep claimed her. Claire would watch from the doorway sometimes and see the transformation happening in real time. This wasn't the cold CEO the world knew. This was the man he'd been before grief had carved him hollow. This was who Julian Hayes was supposed to be. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday in November. Julian had been quieter than usual during the quarterly review, distracted in a way that made the board members exchange concerned glances. Finally, Richard Blackstone, the longest-serving board member, spoke up. Julian, we need to address something. Your behavior has changed. You're distracted, soft. This isn't the Hayes we know. Julian looked around the table at the men who had helped him build his empire. Maybe the Hayes you knew needed to change. Silence. I want to propose something, Julian continued. A company foundation for homeless families, housing assistance, job training, childcare, everything people need to get back on their feet. Blackstone frowned. That's not profitable. Not everything has to be, Julian said quietly. Some things just have to be right. This isn't what we built this company to do. Then maybe we built it wrong, Julian's voice was firm. I'm not asking for approval, I'm informing you. As CEO, I have the authority, and I'm using it. The foundation passed, not because the board agreed, but because Julian didn't give them a choice. That night, he came home to find Emma already asleep. He stood in her doorway, watching her breathe, the same way he'd watched his son in those final hours. But this time, the chest rose and fell steadily. This time, there was tomorrow. He picked up the storybook from the nightstand and settled into the rocking chair beside her crib, reading quietly even though she couldn't hear. Claire appeared in the doorway watching him. You'd be a good father, she said softly. Julian's throat tightened. I was supposed to be. Once. Claire stepped into the room, her voice gentle but firm. You still can be, if you stop punishing yourself for surviving. The words hit Julian like a revelation, like a door opening onto a truth he'd been avoiding for 5 years. He'd been punishing himself for living when Simone died, for breathing when his son couldn't, for continuing to exist when they didn't. He'd spent 5 years being dead because he felt guilty for being alive. Emma and Claire hadn't just needed him. He'd needed them. Needed to remember that life, messy and painful and complicated as it was still worth living. That love, even when it ended in loss, was still worth the risk. Julian looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, looked at Claire standing in the doorway with understanding in her eyes. And he realized something that should have been obvious all along. They were his family, not by blood, not by law, but by choice, by showing up, by staying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 6 months passed like water through fingers. Claire thrived at her teaching job, saving every paycheck, rebuilding piece by piece. Emma grew stronger, healthier, her laughter the soundtrack to Julian's life. And then, on a cold April morning, Claire found an apartment. It's perfect, she told Julian over breakfast, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. 2 bedrooms, affordable, close to the school. Time for us to go. You've done enough. Julian's heart cracked down the middle, but he nodded, respected her independence, her need to stand on her own. Of course, whatever you need. Moving day came too fast. Julian helped load boxes into a rental truck, each one feeling like a piece of his life being carried away. Emma cried, reaching for him over Claire's shoulder. Juju, Juju. I'll visit, Julian promised, his voice thick. I promise, Woodhawn. But they both knew it wouldn't be the same. Julian went home to his mansion that evening. The silence hit him like a physical force. No laughter echoing through the halls. No smell of dinner cooking. No tiny voice calling his name. Just emptiness. The same emptiness he'd lived in for 5 years before Claire and Emma arrived. And he realized with crushing clarity, He couldn't go back to who he was, couldn't be that ghost again, wouldn't survive it. The next morning, Julian stood outside Claire's new apartment at 7 a.m., his heart hammering against his ribs. He knocked. Claire answered, still in her pajamas, Emma on her hip. Julian, what are you? I need to tell you something, he said, the words rushing out before he could lose his nerve. Can I come in? They sat on her second-hand couch, Emma playing with blocks on the floor between them. Julian's hands shook. When Simone died, I died with her, he began, his voice raw. I spent 5 years as a ghost, going through the motions, breathing but not living. I built walls so high nothing could reach me because I was terrified of feeling that pain again. Claire was crying silently, understanding exactly what he meant. You and Emma brought me back to life, Julian continued. You reminded me what it feels like to be human, to care about something more than numbers on a spreadsheet, to come home and have it actually mean something. He looked at Emma, who was watching him with those bright, trusting eyes. I don't want to lose that, lose you, lose her. I can't go back to being that person. Julian, what are you saying? Claire whispered. He took a breath that felt like his first real breath in years. I'm saying I want to be Emma's father, legally, officially, if you'll let me. His voice cracked. I'm saying I want us to be a family. Not because you need me, not because I'm trying to save you, but because I need you, both of you, because you saved me first. Claire's tears fell faster now, her hands covering her mouth. We're not a charity case. I know, Julian said fiercely. You're my family. There's a difference. You're sure? Claire asked, searching his face. Single black CEO adopting a white woman's baby? People will talk. They'll say terrible things. They'll judge you. Julian thought of the board members, the society pages, the whispers that would follow them. 5 years ago, he would have cared, would have calculated the cost to his reputation, his business, his carefully constructed image. Now he didn't hesitate. Let them. I spent 5 years caring what people thought. I'm done. The only opinions that matter are yours and Emma's. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then at Emma, who had crawled over to Julian and was pulling herself up using his pant leg, looking up at him with absolute trust. Then yes, Claire whispered. Yes to all of it. Julian pulled them both into his arms, Emma squealing with delight, Claire sobbing against his shoulder. They sat on that worn couch in that tiny apartment, and Julian felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because this was real. This was family. Not by blood, but by choice, by showing up, by staying, by loving even when it was terrifying. 1 year later, Lincoln Park was alive with spring. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air like snow, and the playground was full of children's laughter. Julian pushed Emma on the swing, her delighted shrieks making other parents smile. Higher, Daddy, higher! Daddy, legal now, official. The adoption had gone through 3 months ago. Julian Hayes, CEO of Hayes Financial Group, was Emma's father. Not her benefactor, not her guardian, her father. Claire sat on a nearby bench watching them with a smile that made Julian's chest ache with happiness. They'd moved back into the mansion together, but it was different now. Claire had insisted on changes, photographs on the walls, Emma's toys scattered in the living room. Life, messy and beautiful and real. The Hayes Foundation had housed 200 families in its first year. Claire ran the family support programs. Julian funded it all without blinking. Money, he'd learned, meant nothing if you weren't using it to make the world better. Emma ran to him now, arms up, demanding to be carried. Julian scooped her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Princess, he whispered into her hair. He wasn't the cold CEO anymore. Wasn't the ghost who'd haunted his own life for 5 years. He was just a dad, a father who read bedtime stories and kissed scraped knees and worried about first days of school. And finally, he was alive again. Julian spent 5 years building walls to protect himself from pain. Walls of money and power and emotional distance. He told himself it was survival, that if he didn't let anyone close, he couldn't lose anyone again. That being numb was safer than being vulnerable. But walls that keep pain out also keep love out, keep joy out, keep life out. Julian had survived, but he hadn't lived. He'd been a ghost in an expensive suit, breathing but not living, existing but not experiencing. It took a desperate mother and a dying baby to break through those walls, to remind him that being alive means being vulnerable, that love always comes with the risk of loss, but it's still worth it, that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's whoever shows up in the rain, whoever refuses to let you stay lost, whoever sees you at your worst and chooses you anyway. Have you ever helped a stranger and had it change your life? Have you ever shown up for someone in their darkest moment, not knowing that somehow they were showing up for you too? Share your story in the comments below, because these moments of connection, these acts of compassion, they're what make us human. If this story reminded you that compassion is stronger than pain, that walls can be broken, that it's never too late to come back to life, subscribe to True Soul Narratives. We tell stories about real people finding their way back to hope. Hit that subscribe button and join our family. Until next time, remember, the coldest hearts can thaw, the highest walls can fall, and sometimes the family you choose is the family you needed all along. Don't be afraid to let people in. Don't be afraid to love again, because the risk of pain is always, always worth the possibility of joy. Stay open. Stay alive. And when you see someone in the rain, be the person who stops.